Hi, everyone, and welcome to Tax Power Hour. Today's episode is Late Filing and Late Payments Penalties for IRS Tax Returns. This is a bonus video from a regular webinar series, and today's date is March 12, 2017. It is important to point out today's date because the tax law may change. So obviously, if you're watching this in 2018, 2019, 2020, whenever it is that you're watching this, the law may be different, so maybe you want to check up on the IRS website to see if something has changed. Anyway, if you're watching this during 2017, this law should apply to the current tax returns. I am Hector Garcia. I'm a CPA, an accountant, and tax planning and QuickBooks consultant in the Miami area. If you need to contact me, if you have any questions about tax, accounting, or QuickBooks, you can email me at hector@garciacpa.com. Quick disclaimer, I may not give any written or electronic advice based on unreasonable assumptions. Therefore, anything that I'm talking about here, I'm talking about general terms. I'm not talking about specific circumstances. You should always consult your own tax professional to make sure that it aligns with your current tax situation. If you don't have a tax professional, you can literally Google directory of federal tax return preparers with credentials, and you will get the IRS listing of all of them. However, if you want to hire me, you can obviously do that. My email is hector@garciacpa.com. Just email me and we may be able to work together. Anyway, there's two really important resources I want to point out. One is the 8 facts about IRS penalties, and publication 504 about underpayment penalties. So let me pull both of those up just so we can see here in context. So this one called 8 facts about failure to pay and failure to file penalties kind of goes through what all the penalties are into 8 bullet points. So definitely you're welcome to look at that resource. And also there's publication 505 actually, which talks about underpaying penalty, and that's a little bit more complex just because there's a lot of numbers in the calculation process, and it kind of walks you through under what circumstances you would get an underpayment penalty for not filing or paying estimated tax returns, etc. But I want to go over all those in detail, but I wanted to make sure we make those two links available, and I'll put them in the comment section on the video as well. Now today's content is tax filing and payment deadlines. So first I want to make sure that we understand which income tax returns we're talking about and what all those deadlines are. Then we'll talk about the late filing fee. So if I file late, I get a fee called penalty for failure to timely file the return. If I pay late, there's a penalty for failure to pay tax timely. And there's also an underpayment of estimated tax penalty, which is if you have not made your tax payments throughout the year. And the fourth penalty is just interest charges by the IRS. And the last topic, we'll talk about the failure to file information returns, most specifically for 1099 forms. Now, what is not being covered in this video? We're not going to be talking about payroll taxes, no payroll forms like 940, 941, W-2. We will not be talking about that. We will not be talking about any state income tax returns or local county, city income tax returns. We will not be talking about foreign asset disclosure returns, often called the FinCEN returns. We will not be talking about sales tax. We will not be talking about gift and state taxes. Also, we're not going to be discussing penalties for inaccuracy, substantial underpayments, negligence, disregardment of rules, assessment during audits, frivolous positions. Those are all other sorts of penalties that are out there. We're going to talk about the regular penalties that most people get. Now, the penalties we'll be discussing will be concerning the individual income tax return, which is the Form 1040, the corporate income tax return, which is the Form 1120, the S-Corp tax return, or the subchapter S tax return, which is the 1120S, that's called an information tax return because it doesn't pay tax, and a Form 1065 partnership, also another information tax return that can get penalties for late filing, but they don't pay taxes in itself. They're called pass-through entities. And lastly, we'll talk about the Form 1099 miscellaneous, which the IRS is cracking down on quite a bit. So let's talk about the tax filing deadlines. First, a Form 1040, an individual tax return for an individual person, or a Form 1120 for a corporation, or often called a C Corp. Both of those must file the return and pay the entire tax penalty by April 15th. If you're in a calendar year taxpayer situation. If you're in a fiscal year, then you just add 105 days to whatever end of the year that you have, and that would be your filing deadline and payment deadline as well. Now, the Forms 1120S and the 1065, which is the S corporation and the partnerships, those have different deadlines. Those have to be filed by March 15th if you're in a calendar year taxpayer, or 75 days after the year closes. So most people March 15th. So that's a different deadline. So April 15th is for individual and C corporations, and March 15th is for partnerships and S corporations. Now you can file extensions if you're an individual taxpayer filing a Form 1040. You can file an extension and extend it all the way to October 15th. Now, even if you file an extension, the extension will only be for filing. It will not be for paying. You still must make an estimated tax payment by April 15th with that extension. Now, if you have a corporation, Form 1120, you can expand that or extend that all the way to September 15th. Same circumstance. The extension is for filing, not for paying. So you must make an estimated tax payment with that extension by April 15th. Now, if you have an S corporation or a partnership, those are due March 15th, as I mentioned before, and those can be extended to September 15th. So the deadline for pass-through entities like S corps and partnerships are March 15 and under extension September 15th. And for corporations, C corporations, that would be April 15th, but under extension is September 15th. And the personal is the one that can be extended up to October 15th. Now, tax payments are due for corporations and individuals by that April 15th date. If you have an S corporation or a 1065, a partnership, those generally do not pay taxes. Now, I say generally because there are some special rules, especially for corporations that were converted, that would have to pay some sort of tax. But generally speaking, S corporations or partnerships that don't have foreign partners have to file by that March 15 deadline, and they never really pay taxes because they pass through the profits through their owners. Now, the individual taxpayers and the corporate taxpayers, those are supposed to file and pay their dues by April 15th. But if they have a tax liability on April 15th, they were actually supposed to make estimated taxes or withholding via payroll throughout the entire year via something called quarterly estimated tax payments. If you don't make quarterly estimated tax payments, there's another penalty called failure to pay estimated taxes or underestimate taxes. So we'll discuss that later on. So again, if there's a tax liability by April 15th, you're supposed to pay that entire liability by April 15th, even if you file an extension. And even if you pay the whole thing in time, there may be a failure to underestimate or underestimating quarterly taxes. We'll discuss all of those in detail. Now, let's start with penalty for failure to timely file the return. So we're talking about filing late. If you have an individual tax return, a Form 1040, or a corporation, a C Corp, Form 1120, and you do not owe any taxes, there's actually no penalty, zero penalty for filing late. And if you do a refund, the deadline to file that late return and get that refund is 3 years. So if you are past that 3-year deadline, you can still file the return late, not get a penalty, but you will not get that refund. Now, there's some special circumstances in which you can, but we're talking about for the most people. Now, if you do owe taxes, so at the end of April 15th, you're an individual taxpayer or a corporation, and you do owe some sort of taxes, you must pay that entire thing by April 15th. If you don't pay it, even if you have an extension, if you don't pay it, you're going to get a penalty. However, we're specifically talking about the penalty for filing late. So if you file an extension on a Form 1040 and you file by October 15th, you will not get any penalties. If you file an extension for a Form 1120 corporation and you file by April 15th, you will not get a penalty. Now, if you don't file that extension or you pay past that extension deadline, the penalty for filing late, it's 5% of the taxes due per month that the tax return is late, up to, and there is a cap of 25% of the tax due. So let's do an example. Form 1040, an individual tax preparer that's filing a 2015 tax return a year late on April 15 of 2017. So again, a year late, 12 months late. And the tax owed was $20,000. What would the penalty be? So we'll take the $20,000, multiply it times 5%. That gives me 1,000 times 12 months. That gives me 12,000. But the cap is 25% of the tax due. Therefore, the penalty would cap out at $5,000 for filing the return late. We're just talking about late filing. We're not talking about paying late. We're talking about late filing only. Now, let's talk about S-corps and partnerships. Now, these are different because S-corps and partnerships do not pay taxes generally. Even if you owe some sort of taxes deriving from the net income of the S-corp or the partnership, the penalties are actually just for filing late. So whether you owe taxes or not owe taxes on the returns that own those S-corps or partnerships, that's irrelevant. If you file late, you will pay late. You can file an extension for an S-corp or a partnership 1065, extended all the way to September 15th. And as long as you file by September 15th, you're good to go. If you file late, if you file on September 16th, you are going to be officially 6 months late. So the late fee is retroactively all the way back to the original filing late on March 15 if you fail to file within that extension period. Now, the fee for late filing is $195 per shareholder or partner per month that the form is late, capped at 12 months. So the cap is a little bit different on S-corps and partnerships. Let's do an example. Let's say if we have a partnership that files a tax return on October 15th. Now, they did file an extension, so for most people, they would be a month late. However, because you failed to file within the September 15 deadline, you're technically 7 months late because you were supposed to file on March 15. Now, anyway, if a partnership has 2 partners, then we have to take 195 times 2 partners times 7 months. And the penalty for filing a partnership return in October would be $2,730. So quite extensive, pretty big penalties for that. So make sure you file your S-corps and partnership returns on time, even if you don't owe any taxes, because the penalties are substantial. Now, what about a failure to pay on time? It's a little bit different than filing late. Pay on time. Form 1040 individuals or 1120 corporations. If you do not owe any taxes on a Form 1040 or 1120, there's no penalty for late filing. Okay? And obviously there's no late paying because you don't owe any taxes. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a 3-year deadline for requesting refunds for late filed returns. If you do owe taxes, if you have a tax liability for a Form 1040 or 1120, so individual or corporations, you must pay that by April 15th. Even if you have an extension, you must pay that by April 15th. The failure to not pay the tax, different than filing, to pay the tax, it's 0.5%, so 0.5% of the taxes due for each month that the tax return is late, or in this case, that the tax payment is late, because the tax return could have been filed on time. and there's a 25% cap on that. So let's do an example. Let's say we have an individual that files a return on time, October 15th, because they had an extension. So they will not get a failure to file timely. They're going to file that on time on the deadline, October 15th. And they owe $10,000 in taxes. Now, because you didn't pay that back in April 15th, even if you had an extension, you're going to pay $300 in a failure to timely pay. Why? Because you got 10,000 times 0.5% times 6 months. That's what you get. And the cap for this is also the same 25% that we had on the failure to file on time. So if you were to pay a tax 5 years late, the tax would cap at $2,500 with a $10,000 liability from 10 years ago, because there is that 25% cap. Now, if you both file late and pay late, which is possible, very common by the way, on an individual tax return or a corporation, the combined penalty, it's 5% with a cap of 25. So it wouldn't be that 5% plus that 0.5%. It would cap at the 25% lifetime and that 5% per month. So those are the failure to pay and failure to file. Let's talk about the most misunderstood of all the penalties. Most people understand they file late, they'll pay a penalty. But even if you pay on time, you may get a penalty for underpayment of estimated taxes. So we're talking about individuals and corporations. If you owe more than $1,000 on April 15th, there's a penalty for not paying those taxes throughout the year. You're actually supposed to pay quarterly estimated taxes or withhold via your payroll if you're an individual of at least 90% of your total tax liability for the year, or 100% of the previous year's tax liabilities, whichever is highest. So if you owed some money last year, you better pay the same amount this year to avoid a failure to pay estimated taxes. Now, usually you make those payments quarterly on specific dates or by specific dates. So quarter 1, it's April 15th. Quarter 2 is June 15th. Quarter 3 is September 15th throughout that tax year. And quarter 4 would be January 15th. So as long as you make 4 equal payments of the entire tax due that you're going to pay in the future, in the April 15th, if you make them throughout the year, then you don't pay an underpayment of estimated tax penalty. But if you don't make that payment, you're going to get that penalty even if you file and pay on time. So let's discuss the forms. So for the underpayment of estimated taxes, a little bit more complicated. There's a specific form that has a very long formula. For individuals, it's form 2210. So you can Google that, take a look at that. On the 2016 tax year, the penalty is about 2.7% for underpaying taxes on April 15th. And then if you pay them past April 15th, it goes up by 0.011% per day. So it's a daily cumulative amount. For corporations, it could be different because there's special rules for seasonality and annualized income. So if you got a business that makes all their income during the last quarter, it would be unfair that your penalty would be for not paying the first quarter of estimated taxes because you really didn't have any money to pay. So that form 2220 allows you to make all those calculations. Generally speaking, you pay about 4% APR on the day that you pay compared to the day that you were supposed to make that estimated payment. It's kind of a pretty long, complicated formula. Most tax preparers have tax software that does this, but it's important for you to know that that tax is there. And if you pay past April 15th, you got to check the IRS website for the current interest rate, typically between 3 and 4%, or it has been in the last couple of years, which would be an additional sort of interest you pay for not paying by that April 15th date. So let's do an example of that. So we have a self-employed individual that fails to make their estimated taxes throughout the year and has no payroll. They went ahead and they file and pay 100% of their tax on time on April 15th. But previous year, they actually paid $10,000 in taxes. This year, it ends up being about the same. So the IRS says, hey, because you paid $10,000 the previous year, you should have paid $10,000 throughout the year in 4 quarterly payments of $2,500 each in order to make those estimated payments. So if you don't make those payments, but you do make your entire tax payment on April 15th, that would be about 2.7% of a penalty for that. So on a $10,000 liability, you're going to pay the $10,000 plus $270 for underpayment, even if you pay and file on time on April 15th. Now, interest is the other one. Typically, IRS takes the federal short-term rate and adds 3% to that. So that today, that's 4%. So on top of all those penalties for filing late, paying late, after April 15th, they start accruing interest, the penalties and the tax due. And those accrue an interest at about 4% APR. And that is in a daily sort of compounding basis, but it's 4% APR. Okay. So even if you pay taxes a month late on May 15th, you're going to have to calculate on, for example, $12,270, calculate that 4% APR for 30 days, which is about $17. So you not only pay the failure to underpay your estimated taxes, but you also pay interest if you pay past that April 15th deadline. Now, in a nutshell, we got penalties, we got interest, and we got liabilities. Remember that these are not all mutually exclusive. These are typically all combined. I recommend that you file on time, even with an extension, file on time, even if you can't pay the taxes, because the failure to file penalties or the late filing penalties are typically much higher than the late payment penalty. So the IRS wants you to at least file on time, and if you can't pay, make a payment plan. Arrange it with the IRS. Now, the IRS will typically charge between $40 and $225 to establish that payment plan, depending on how you pay, if it's an automated payment, your income brackets, and that sort of thing. And that would be on top of all the other penalties. And all those penalties still apply with the payment plan until the balance goes all the way down. But again, you want to file on time, even if you can't pay, and then make an arrangement to make a payment plan with the IRS. Now, changing gears a little bit, let's talk about the Form 1099 Miscellaneous. This is a form that businesses have to give individuals that are being paid from that business compensation. So a subcontractor, an independent contractor, a consultant, a person working part-time but is not an employee, and is getting paid for just straight payment as a contractor or for consulting services, the business must file a 1099 Miscellaneous. If that form is not filed by April 31st, there's a late filing fee of $50 per form, if you file within 30 days of that January 31st deadline. And there's a cap of $500,000 on it. So if you got a pretty big business with a lot of 1099s, that's going to be per form. Now, if you file after those 30 days late, if you file like, let's say in March, and you have all the way through end of July, that would be $100 per form. And the cap is much higher, $1.5 million. If you don't file within that six month range, 180-day range, and you file afterwards, or you don't file at all, the fee per form is $260 per 1099 that's not filed. Or if the IRS deems it intentional disregard, it can go all the way to $530 per form, per person that you don't file for, and there's no cap. So that's a really important one. A lot of people are not paying attention to that one. The IRS is definitely cracking down on 1099 miscellaneous forms. Now, stay connected. If you have any other questions about tax, join our Facebook group. It's called Tax Power Hour. Just search in Facebook for a group called Tax Power Hour. There's a whole bunch of tax practitioners, accountants, and tax enthusiasts in that forum, in that group, that answer questions, ask questions, so you'll learn a lot about tax. If you have a specific question for me, email me, hector@garciacpa.com. Even if you don't intend to hire me as your accountant, ask me a question. If it's simple enough, I'll answer it. Otherwise, if you do want to hire me, there's my email. Now, I also recommend that you join our webinar series. We started a webinar this year in 2017. It's the third Wednesday of every month at noon, and it's called Tax Power Hour. There's the link. I'll put that in the description as well. We talk about all sorts of different tax topics every month. Now, I hope that this was informational and this helps. You got my email if you have any questions. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining us today, and have a wonderful day.